Mitt Romney has almost unanimously been declared the winner of the first presidential debate. Yet much of what he said has also been found to be untrue. What does that tell us about how the US media covers politics? You're watching Inside Story, US 2012, from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Rutansi. The presidential debates are supposed to give the American people a crucial chance to judge the merits of each candidate as they discuss the key issues over 90 minutes. And the Republicans are in a buoyant mood. The media proclaimed that Mitt Romney won a resounding victory over President Obama in Denver on Wednesday. The debate's moderator, Jim Lehrer of PBS, a veteran of 12 presidential debates, has previously said it's not the job of the moderator to challenge untruths. And faced with a subdued president, Mitt Romney was allowed to make bold statements that even commentators from the right accept had little substance or were outright false. US broadcasters spend millions on their cutting-edge graphics and teams of fact-checkers, but their focus was not on whether the man asking to become president was blatantly displaying fundamental dishonesty, but on how successful he'd been in appearing to be a credible candidate. Even self-identified liberal networks came to this conclusion.
Good morning. Style and substance. Mitt Romney delivers in Denver, commanding the conversation, revving up his base and making some Republicans wondering where that guy has been during these many long months of the general election.
So is the US media holding politicians to account? We're joined by Matt Butler, president of Media Matters here in DC. From Denver, Colorado, Amy Goodman, host and executive producer of Democracy Now! And from New York, David Westin, who served as president of ABC News between 1997 and 2010. David Westin, in a debate like the one that we saw this week, should truth have a major place in any judgments about victory?
Well, it does have a major place, and it should. As many people are reporting today and yesterday about the debate that we saw on Wednesday, the question of what was true and what was false is front and center. I think there's no question about that. But I also think that appearances do matter, and I don't think we should apologize about that.
But surely, though, I mean, on the night, certainly, and in the immediate aftermath, there became a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. It was because Mitt Romney wasn't being held up to scrutiny that the narrative was able to be built, therefore, that he was the victor.
Although my experience with these debates, whether they're in the primaries or in the general, is that a lot of the responsibility for holding people to account lies with the other candidate. One of the things we expect a candidate to do is to know the facts and to challenge the other candidate. And one of the things that was surprising me on Wednesday was there wasn't as much of that as I would have expected.
That's interesting, Amy Goodman. So basically, we were allowed to also see Barack Obama's mettle in not challenging Mitt Romney, and it wasn't, therefore, the media's role to judge. It was simply the media's role to judge how successfully Mitt Romney was pulling the wool over the eyes of the electorate. But it wasn't necessarily the media's role to point out that the wool was being pulled over the eyes of the electorate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the media should step outside what the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate have to say and really express the views of people all over the country and raise critical questions. But it was extremely surprising. I mean, with the amount of money that is being spent by both presidential campaigns, all that the Democrats have been putting forward. For example, that video talking about the 47% that Mitt Romney described people in this country, 40% of Americans not paying taxes, feeling like they are entitled to this from the federal government. The fact that President Obama, although in his ads it keeps being raised, he didn't raise it. The fact that he didn't raise when talking about the economy, that issues of Bain Capital and offshore accounts, all of the issues that have been raised and bandied about in this country, I think it shocked many that he didn't move in and talk about what is fair, because that's what Americans care about, what is fair.
So Matt Butler, then, do you think then Jim Lehrer was right in not interceding? This was a sign of Barack Obama's weakness. It wasn't simply a matter of Mitt Romney putting forward a point that was untrue and therefore having to be challenged for the viewer, for the sake of the viewers, even if Barack Obama wasn't challenging.
He probably should have been more aggressive, especially because we know that the media wanted Mitt Romney to be the victor in this debate. They want this race to stay close. And so if he did even a little bit better than expectation, they were going to declare him the winner. And he did a lot better than expectation.
Right, but you don't think there's some conspiracy, therefore, though, to not challenge him on the night then?
No, I don't think conspiracy is the wrong word, but they do want this to stay a race.
What was interesting, though, was clearly the various cable networks do understand that part of their role, at least, though, certainly in the aftermath of the debate, is to challenge some of the things said. And so, but even then, it was fascinating to see how that analysis took place. Here's a bit of CNN's fact-checking approach.
Let's look at the facts here. Mitt Romney does propose an across-the-board 20% tax cut. And the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center says that under that plan, taxes on the wealthiest Americans would be reduced by $5 trillion initially. But Mitt Romney says he would offset these cuts with, by closing some loopholes and reducing deductions, and this would reduce the tax cut on the wealthy here. So if Mitt Romney follows through with that, our verdict here is that the president's claim that Mitt Romney would cut the wealthy's taxes by $5 trillion is false.
I mean, Amy Goodman, how's the electorate supposed to understand that? So basically they're saying he said this, he didn't give any details, but if eventually one day he does give details, then clearly what he said was correct.
I mean, I think that we have to look at who is even raising these issues. Why is it just the major party candidates who are debating? I mean, we should look beyond this. At Democracy Now! NewsHour, what we did is we invited the third-party candidates into the debate, quite literally. We ran the debate. Jim Lehrer asked the questions. Romney, Obama responded. We paused the tape, and we had Jill Stein of the Green Party, Rocky Anderson of the Justice Party responding as well, raising very different points, actually really exposing what was going on. And you have to ask how it is that this Commission on Presidential Debates actually came to control these debates. They just represent the Republican and Democratic Party, and their main goal is to keep out third parties that raise substantial issues about both the Democrats and Republicans, especially when they agree on many issues.
So, David Westin, I mean, as when you were in charge of ABC News, clearly there was at least one presidential debate under your watch. I mean, did these questions come up then? Whether the moderator should be, just for the purposes of those watching who may not get a chance necessarily to do the follow-up spade work to find out whether the candidates were telling the truth or not, whether they should be challenged on the night, and two, whether they were getting the full spectrum of political opinion and indeed the third-party candidates who could make American democracy a bit more representative?
Well, I was there for 2000, 2004, and 2008, so I was actually there through 3 rounds of presidential debates. Listen, the news media includes a very big tent at this point, and that's a good thing for our country, I think. The fact is, having 90 minutes, 3 times or 4 times, 3 times for the president, 1 for the vice president, every 4 years, where the 2 candidates who have a reasonable chance of being president have to talk to one another and answer questions is a very constructive thing. That doesn't mean that there isn't role for third-party candidates in other formats, in other forums to address things, but I think it would be a terrible thing to do away with the debates about the 2 candidates who actually have a chance of being president. And on the night
don't they have a
itself,
chance
what
of being
Jim Lehrer's
president because
job
they have a
is...
debate? Amy Goodman, sorry.
No, that's not right at all.
I think we have to look at, it used to be that the League of Women Voters ran the presidential debate. They sort of represented the American people. They were independent from the parties that were represented in this debate. Then the Commission on Presidential Debates, which was originally co-chaired by the head of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, wrested it from them. And I don't agree that you just take the 2 people with the most, with the highest percentage in polling, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's why the representative, the presidential candidate of the Libertarian Party, the former governor of New Mexico, Gary Johnson, has sued on antitrust claims. How do you get higher in the polls when you have something like 40, 50 million people watching this? You cannot, unless you have this kind of exposure, ever make it. And the parties understand this. The Commission on Presidential Debates, which is sponsored, by the way, by Anheuser-Busch and the International Bottled Water Association, they know that if they get more exposure, they too could actually be viable. So we set up a situation in the United States where you only have these two major parties. I don't think that's good for democracy.
David Westin, what about the moderator, the role of the moderator then? You really think it's simply hands-off? There's this idea that all ideas are valid, whether true or untrue. It's just up to the electorate then to make their own decision.
Well, no, wait a second. That's a false choice. On that given night, for that 90 minutes, the role of the moderator is to enforce the format, to keep people to time, to make sure that they're responding to questions, things like that. It's not to be a fact checker. But that's not to say we just leave it up to the electorate to sort out what's true. Look at all the work that's been done since Wednesday night by all sorts of media to go over the truth or falsity of what was being said. That's certainly the role of the media to do that. And there are all sorts of interviews that are done with candidates where the interviewers are holding them to task and challenging them. But for that 90 minutes, to have time for the two of them to just talk to us, I think is a good thing.
But might not Matt Butler, though, now there is a great deal of analysis, that's true. But might that dominant narrative, though, I mean, it's too late for that now, isn't it? I mean, you know.
Sure. I think it was on the part of the media, they wanted to declare a winner first and fact check later. I mean, we did a piece. BuzzFeed announced 40 minutes into the debate that Mitt Romney was the winner. I mean, the debate wasn't even half over, and you have people so needing to get up first with the story that they're announcing 40 minutes in a winner. So, but yes, and that leads to the dominant narrative that you're talking about.
But Amy Goodman, it's something that we hear often, not just in the context of presidential debates, but actually in the way that ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, the quote non-partisan media outlets set the agenda. That they're simply a broad church, that all ideas are valid, and yet it is very selective, isn't it, as to what issues they do discuss?
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, facts do matter. And I think it's also important what questions weren't raised. I mean, issues of critical importance to people in this country. You have everything, you know, there was a very interesting campaign. Here you had the first debate in Denver, in Colorado, that was just miles from two massacres at Aurora, most recently at Columbine High School. Big campaign by the Brady Center for Against Gun Violence. To include a question about gun violence and about violence in American society. This is a domestic policy debate that was taking place. One of the biggest ones that certainly the parties aren't going to raise is campaign finance. The fact that there are more than $2 billion that are going to be spent in this election, how we have this kind of system. It's the first post-Citizens United election. But both parties are involved with this, and so they tend to not raise the kinds of issues that matter, because they're then beholden to the very forces that the rest of America is saying is questioning.
And David, let's broaden this out from simply the debates, but the entire coverage of the election campaign, and many of these issues are not front and center as far as the non-partisan media are concerned. They just stick to the rather narrow confines of the economy, and even when the economy is discussed, it's simply about how much we should reduce the deficit, as opposed to perhaps other alternative ways of looking at America's economic future.
Well, I'll address it, but first of all, let me go back. I don't think there's any basis to say that the mainstream news media in this country doesn't care about the truth or falsity of what's being said. There is all sorts of reporting being done every single day on that, so I don't think that's borne out. But go back to what Amy was just talking about. There's been extensive coverage in the mainstream media about the costs of these campaigns and how they're being financed, and in fact, Citizens United. There's been this is not an issue that's gone unheeded in this country or by the mainstream news media. Now, maybe it's not as much as you would like, or maybe it's not in the place you would like, but I think at this point it's very difficult to say that those issues are not being addressed.
Amy?
But what about raised in the debate itself, David?
Well, you have 90 minutes.
To make the candidates respond.
You have 90 minutes, as you saw, and Jim Lehrer didn't manage to get through all the subjects they already had identified. We also have 2 more presidential debates to come, and I don't know. Gun control, I think, I'm entirely in favor of raising that question.
All right, let's move beyond the debates again. Matt Butler, I mean, again, it's about the parameters of the debate about the election as a whole, and which issues are deemed to be important and which issues are deemed to be not important or are outside the mainstream, or questions for the extreme left or the extreme right. I mean, how are those decisions being made, and how well then do you think the media is serving the electorate?
Well, I think that it's an interesting question. I mean, it's, Jim Lehrer himself picked the questions for the debate. I don't know if Candy Crowley's going to pick the questions for the next one. There's going to be a town hall
even
element.
in the day-to-day discussion about the election campaign, I mean, when we talk about, for example, gun control or even foreign policy or alternative views of looking at the economy that aren't simply about how much are we going to cut, but about actually looking at different economic policies. It's very difficult to find those. It's all the parameters have been set, apparently, as to what is moderate and sensible discussion in this election campaign, don't you think?
I don't know if that's actually correct. I mean, I think that it is, it's the flow of the news at day to day, and it's kind of as current events come up, that's going to dictate things. So today we're talking about jobs numbers because the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers came out today, and it's all going to be about jobs today. Tomorrow it might be something different. It may be foreign policy or whatever.
Amy, do you think that it's simply about what's happening and then decisions are made? I mean, who is making the decision about what are the most important issues in this election campaign?
Well, really, I think the media are the most powerful forces here. And when it comes to big issues, like one of the next debates is going to be, the last debate will be on foreign policy. The Democrats and the Republicans aren't that far apart. For example, on Afghanistan, that was what was so crazy about Clint Eastwood when he gave this address on the floor, on the stage of the Republican convention, raising questions about why Guantanamo wasn't closed. I mean, I think that's a fair criticism of President Obama. I just didn't expect to hear it on the stage of the Republican convention, and Obama presiding over the longest war in U.S. history. On these issues, the Democrats and the Republicans, very much the parties agree. And what we need is a media that goes outside of that and asks why. Why isn't the war ending now, as opposed to what the Democrats and the Republicans debate? Why aren't more people charged around the issue of bringing down the economy in 2008, or these financial institutions being held accountable? Because the very people that surround Romney, it's not so dissimilar to the people who President Obama has surrounded himself by, whether we're talking about Larry Summers or Timothy Geithner or Rubin or the others. I mean, you have two parties that in some essential ways very much represent the same groupings. And yet I think the vast majority of people in this country are outside of that. And the media should be representing those voices.
I mean,
but the media is not monolithic. I mean, you have very different actors with very different agendas that make up the media. I mean, look at Fox News, for instance. Right. They have a very specific agenda, and they're going to drive their issues.
We all know what Fox News is up to, but it's when ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN suggest that they are somehow above the fray and are simply reacting to day-to-day events. That we have to wonder. Actually, one's always reminded of Dan Rather in the aftermath of September 11th, when possibly media scrutiny was needed the most as to what the government was going to do, coming out with this statement on Letterman.
George Bush is the president. He makes the decisions. And, it's just one American. Wherever he wants me to line up, just tell me where. Yeah. And he'll make the call. I do think we'll see something reasonably strong, but soon, and strong because President Bush and those around him know that America seethes. And there are an awful lot of people asking the question you did. What are we waiting on? Let's get them.
I think, David, I mean, that always kind of brings up that question of the relationship between the mainstream media and the dominant centers of power in the U.S., the president and indeed the official and the main opposition and so forth. How do they see themselves, especially when it comes to foreign policy? And might that be why both President Obama and Romney aren't getting under much more scrutiny when it comes to certain issues?
Well, I mean, I know Dan Rather. I like Dan Rather. I totally disassociate myself with the remark that you just played. That was not our attitude with ABC News. And in fact, at the time, we were in very difficult exchanges with the White House because we were questioning at the time what was going on. So that's not the attitude, I think, of most of the traditional journalists in this country, either print or otherwise. We are supposed to exercise a certain checking function on the government. We're supposed to ask difficult questions, whether it's a Democrat in the White House or a Republican in the White House or some other party in the White House. Our job is to try to hold them to account, and we should not be too close and not be too friendly with those in the White House. We can be respectful, but we should be asking tough questions all the time, and I think that's the way most people really perceive it who are in mainstream media.
Amy?
I completely agree with David, except that's not how it goes down. I mean, let's look at the 2 weeks around Colin Powell, then Secretary of State, giving his push for war at the UN. It was February 5th, 2003. The group Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, a media watch group in New York, looked at the 4 major nightly newscasts, the NBC Nightly News, the CBS Evening News, ABC World News Tonight, and the PBS NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. In that 2-week period, 6 weeks before the U.S. started bombing Iraq, there were 393 interviews done around war. This is around when half the population was against, half for. 393 interviews done around war in that 2-week period. How many were with anti-war leaders? 3. 3 of almost 400. That is no longer a mainstream media. That's an extreme media beating the drums for war.
All right.
And that's unacceptable.
Okay, Amy, I actually may surprise you by agreeing with you to a large degree. I think one of the greatest failings, certainly during my tenure of me and my cohorts, was that we didn't press hard enough on weapons of mass destruction. We had all sorts of excuses, but it really didn't justify what went on. At the same time, we did a 2-hour special about a week before the war began that included anti-war people and were severely criticized.
Let's bring this up to date.
It's just not fair.
Let's bring this up to date, though. So Iran will no doubt come up in the presidential debates now. But it won't be in the context of asking both candidates why they are, and they broadly agree on their Iran policy. But the assumption of the debate, no doubt, and as it has been throughout the election, is Ahmadinejad is a crazy lunatic who's building nuclear weapons with a view to wiping Israel off the map. I doubt very much, because it hasn't happened so far, that anyone's going to say, hang on, the US's own intelligence report says the Iranian nuclear weapons program ended in 2003. Ahmadinejad isn't even in charge of that, and actually the whole wiping off the map thing was never ever said anyway. That dominant narrative will be taken in, as it is constantly, by ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. And therefore, I mean, again, it's the same. It does remind me a little bit of the run-up to the Iraq War. That fundamental questioning about the dominant narrative isn't going to happen, despite the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Matt?
Well, I don't know. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully we will be more critical this time through. Hopefully we will be asking those questions, and the media will help with that. So.
Well, that's it. I mean, David, are you sure, you convinced that the lessons of Iraq have been learned when you look at how unquestioning the media continues to be about claims about Iran's nuclear program?
Well, listen, things like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or Iran's nuclear program are very difficult as a practical matter for U.S. reporters to get at. I mean, we can't go over in Iran and physically inspect the facilities.
Well, the IAEA is actually there. I mean, that's the point. That's often ignored, of course, that it is all being inspected on a daily basis, every minute by cameras. I mean, that's the point, though. Is it because they don't? I mean, they're not aware of it, or are they so especially when it comes to foreign policy, they're so taken in by the dominant narrative from President Obama or the Republican Party?
Well, they said, no, it's not from parties either. It can be international intelligence services, things like that. That we do, I mean, in the media have various sources in intelligence services around the world, and we do our best to try to sift through it and make sense of it. And we do ask difficult questions. I mean, internally, one of the big mistakes I made was Peter Jennings was much more skeptical of WMD than we should have been. And at the time he said it to me, and I thought he was wrong, because our reporting, and it was good, solid reporting, said that all the intelligence services reported it was there. So, but we can get it wrong. At the same time, we have an obligation to try to figure out what we think is right and wrong, and not just put it out there for the American people to sort out.
So there is a decision about right and wrong then. It's not simply letting both parties speak and then letting the electorate or the US people make their mind up. I mean, and you do wonder, Amy, about dominant narratives. For example, right now, the media does by and large accept President Obama's definition of anyone killed in Pakistan or Afghanistan as being an enemy combatant if he looks about the right age, unless he's posthumously decided that it's posthumously proved that he's not a combatant and so forth. Again, do you feel that there's that questioning? Or, for example, on the economy, that the only way forward is to cut Social Security and to reduce the deficit when there are alternatives? I mean, are these narratives, these dominant narratives from both Democrats and Republicans, being challenged? It doesn't seem so.
Well, I mean, I think the example of the drone war and President Obama's escalation of these drone attacks in Yemen and in Pakistan, this is a story that the media does cover, the drone attacks, but again, continually talking about, assumed militants, when the very definition, according to the U.S. administration, is if we kill them, they are militants. I think what we need to also hear from is the peace movement. Rarely do you have those voices in the media. We go back to 2003, we look at today. Right now in Pakistan, you have a large number of Americans who have gone to Pakistan in a very dangerous situation to march to Waziristan saying, we represent a different America who doesn't think it's right to drop these
All right, Amy, we're running out of time.
For drones to drop
Very quickly, David Westin,
on Pakistani civilians.
This is the point, though. This is the role of the media as gatekeeper. Who are moderate voices, who are sensible voices, and who are extreme voices, and so forth. I mean, it's that decision-making process that I suppose it's so intriguing, because that's who is then allowed into the political discourse in the first place, those who are allowed to raise the major questions in an election campaign.
Yeah, but the media is not a gatekeeper in this country anymore. Not with social media, not with the internet, not with cable news. That's not true. It's much more of a curating role of going in and trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong as best you can and explain it to the American people in ways that they will remember. That's what you do. There was a day when it was a gatekeeper. Not true anymore.
David Westin, thank you very much. Matt Butler, thank you. Amy Goodman, thank you as well.
Thanks
all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.